Right, in the Django tutorial, the next part we'll talk about tests, but we're going to skip tests for now. Tests are very important, and we will talk about tests before we go on to the next project. We'll talk about class-based views, static files in development, customizing the admin panel, and this will be the last video in which we just follow along with the Django tutorial. We still might come back to it, but it's not just going to be a step-by-step through the tutorial. I have Django 3.2 running for this video, but we were using the documentation for 3.0. That was a mistake on my part, one of many, I'm sure. There aren't any real differences between 3.0 and 3.2 between the tutorial up to this point, but they did redesign this detail.html, so I'm going to copy that. And if you take a look, it's a little fancier, but other than that, there is no difference. The next part in this tutorial is about generic views. Views could get very complicated, but Django provides us a set of generic view classes that we can subclass and customize to suit our needs, and that saves us a bunch of writing. Right, the tutorial has us updating our URLs file first, but I think we should update views.py first. The first big change we're going to see is we're going to import generic from Django views. And next we're going to replace our index with this index view, which is a subclass of list view. And we'll do the same for the other views. They're going to leave the vote function as is, which illustrates the point that in some cases you'll want to use their generic views. In other cases, a function-based view is just what you need. And now if we go back up to our URLs, you may notice that we changed the index view function to this index view class. That's this class defined here. But we're pointing to a method called asView. Now, the only method that we defined in our class is getQuerySet. So if you're not quite sure about how Python and subclassing works, you might be wondering, okay, where is this asView? Well, it's in generic list view. Or more to the point, it's in one of the classes that list view inherits from. But the main thing you need to know is that referring to class-based views in your URLs, you have to append it with asView. So go back to our URLs file. And for these generic views, question ID became PK. Right? And it works the same. Now, I don't know why they didn't do this, but we could have used PK in our function view also. So that would have worked just fine. Now, PK is just a reference to the ID. And Django is a little cagey as to why they prefer PK. But it should be enough to know that the generic views expect the primary key to come from a variable called PK. But just know that PK refers to the primary ID of the model, and that ID is usually just a field called ID. I just downloaded this cursor highlighter script. Anyway, it's surprising to me how little time the tutorial spent on generic views. I think it's a really big topic, and they just gave a few lines to it. Now, if you take a look down here, they have a link to the documentation, and there's some more information there. But I want to illustrate something here. So we're going to go back to our admin panel. And I'm going to add a whole bunch of questions. All right, added a bunch of questions. Let's go back to our view. Now, I added more than 5 questions, but as you see, there's only 5 displayed. And that's because of what we wrote in getQuerySet. So take a look at our index view, and we have getQuerySet itself, and we're going to return question objects. Remember, objects is a model function that returns records. Order by pub date, and this is a Python slice. It means we're going to return the last 5 records. Or I'm sorry, the first 5 records. Last 5 because we're ordering backwards by publication date. Now, if I deleted all of this, the function would still run. Whoops, I guess it won't run. And give it a model, which is important. You see now, all of the ones that we entered are displayed. So if we take a look at list view, now we're in my virtual environment right now. If we take a look at our list view, this is the class list view, and as you see, it inherits from multiple object template response mixin. That's a lot of words. That in turn inherits from multiple object mixin, and there's a get query set right here. So this method is already defined for us, and as long as we go back to our view, as long as we give it a model, def query set will work for us. I mean, get query set will work for us. And that's one of many methods that we can override in order to customize our view. And in fact, template name and context object names, these are both attributes that we overwrote in order to customize our view. They each have default values. If the model is question, then the template name by default would be question list.html, and the context object name by default is object list. In fact, I'll illustrate that by getting rid of this. If we go back to our view, this won't run properly. And that's because in our view, that's because in our template, which was indexed HTML, we wrote for question in latest question list, but let's just say question in object list. And you see, we didn't define object list, but that was already defined for us. And all we didn't do this time is we didn't override the name object list. Let me take this a step further. Remember the template name by default will be question list.html. So if we go to our view right now and refresh, it'll complain because it can't find a template file. So let's go back here and we'll take index.html and we're just going to rename it. Right? And now let's redo. All right. And as you can see, with just, if we take a look at our views, with just one line of code inside our class, we have a fully functional view. And that's because we tapped into hundreds of lines of code that were already written for us just by subclassing list view. All right, the next section in our tutorial is about static files, which they point out are files such as images, JavaScript, or CSS. Unlike a template file, which runs code and will display different things based on the questions that are in the database or the choices or any other variables like that. A CSS file It's not going to change as during runtime. And as the documentation says, it doesn't really matter much for small projects. But as your project gets bigger, you're going to want to move these static files somewhere else, maybe even to a different URL. And part of the reason is that your Python code, it might be running under one server like Apache, but Apache isn't the best server for static files. And so a better choice for static files might be Nginx. And so you want to move your static files somewhere other than where your Python and your template files are. And Django provides an easy way to move those files. But during development, those files are still going to be inside of your app directories. So in our polls app, we're going to create a directory called static, and in that static directory, another directory called polls, and that's the same naming convention that we did with the templates. That redundant polls, static, polls, and then file style.css. Now you don't have to follow this naming convention exactly, but it's a good idea because Django, just like with templates, Django is going to look for a static directory in each app, and then to prevent naming clashes, it's a good idea then to make another directory with the name of your app. So they give us a very simple example here. And now we need to go back to our templates. They added this line here, load static, or these lines, load static, and then a link to the style sheet. And just, I had a little trouble getting this started right now, so I had to stop the server, run it again. And also with Firefox, sometimes you still won't see changes, especially to styling. And it's a good idea to hit Control F5 to refresh the screen. So if you've made changes and you know you've made changes and they're not showing up on Firefox, Control F5. I'm not sure if you have to do something similar with Chrome. But having made those changes, you could see, so putting a style file in our static directory, and then referencing that static directory by first using the tag load static, and then using the tag static, and then the path to the CSS file. And that path being everything after static. All right, next, just for practice, they're going to have us create a subdirectory inside of our static directory and put an image file in there. So we'll go back to our editor here. Here's our static polls directory. Images. And they say put a background.gif file in there. Of course, they don't tell you exactly where to get that from, but you can start up any graphics editor that you may have. I'll just put some random design in there. All right, let's see what that looks like. Oops, wait, first we have to go back to our style file and add this. Okay, now let's go back and see how that looks. All right, that looks pretty awful, but at least it illustrates how this works. The point being simply that you can have a subdirectory and you can reference that subdirectory inside of your CSS file. But what they do want to say with this warning is that you cannot use a template tag inside of your CSS file, because the template tag is code that's run by Django, and code cannot run on a static file. Moving on to the next part of our tutorial, we're going to go on to customizing the admin form. And let's just take a look at what our admin form looks like right now. Wow, that just really looks absolutely awful, but not worried about that right now. Moving on to the admin form, let's take a look at what our questions look like in the admin form. In fact, let's take a look at one question in particular. All right, so looking at what Django did for us, they really did a lot of good things for us. They set up this whole admin form, did some fancy things with the fields, and they're displaying our fields in order as they were defined in our model. Let's take a look at our model. All right, here's our question model, question, and then pub date, which is a date time field. And this is how the admin model displays date time fields for us. Very fancy. But we can customize how this is displayed. For example, if we go to the tutorial, they're going to make it so that pub date gets displayed first. Now, the way they're going to do that, so by default, when we register a model, like we did here, admin site register question, that uses a class inside admin called model admin. But what we're going to do is we're going to make our own model admin. We're going to subclass that. We'll call it question admin. It'll be a subclass of admin, model admin. And we're going to add this line to our question admin. And this will tell us which fields get displayed and the order in which they display. Right. Now that we've created our question admin, we have to register this with our model. So instead of just leaving it as question, we add question admin. So now instead of using the default model admin, our question is going to be registered to the admin site with this question admin class. All right, let's see how that works. All right, and as you see, date published came first, question text came second. All right, and then back on the tutorial, they show that you can break these fields up into field sets, but the example is paltry because there's only 2 fields in our question form. So I'm going to add a few more fields just to give you a better idea than this of what breaking it up into field sets looks like. So let's go back to our question model. And I'm going to add a few more fields. And remember, if you make these changes, you have to migrate. Oops. It's complaining because I have text fields, and if it adds all of these text fields to the models that already exists, it doesn't know what to put in those places. And I'm just going to tell it, just go ahead and provide a one-off default right now. In other words, I'm going to tell it to put an empty string in there. All right, it's happy about that. Once you make your migrations, you have to actually migrate. Well, I did this the first time, an error came up because of something that I was messing with while the video wasn't running. And so I just fixed that error and ran my migration, and everything worked. All right, so now with all of these extra fields in our question model, let's take another look at what our admin site looks like. First, I need to rerun the server. All right. Now, if we take a look at our admin, it's still going to display the same fields. The reason for that is it's displaying just what we told it to display in our question admin. If we go ahead and remove that and just have it use the default admin, it would display all of the fields. And we can organize this better by splitting this up into field sets. But instead of using their example, we're going to expand on their example to include all of the fields that we added. But add in the fields that we just created. All right, as you see, each field set is a tuple. First with the title of the field set, which in the first field set is none. And then with a dictionary with the key fields and a list of the fields that are in that are under fields. All right, and then re-register the admin site with question admin. Let's go back and see if I made a mistake. I probably did make a mistake. But let's see. Oh no, it worked out just fine. All right, so in the details section, we have our details on the topic, and in our info section, date published and author. Now the next section in the tutorial is about adding an inline, adding a related object inline. Now the first thing they're going to do is add choice to the admin panel. We've already done that. So let's go ahead and add our inline. We're going to add a choice inline to the question model admin. And as you see, the choice inline is a subclass of admin stacked inline. Go ahead and add that here. And then in our question admin, inlines equals choice inline. And let's see how that looks. And as you see, there's the two choices that we already added and enough room for 3 more. These are extras. They don't represent any choices that actually exist, but they're there so that we can add some more on our own. And there'll always be 3 extras. So if we added a choice 3, there would appear a choice 6. And as the tutorial also covers, we could change this instead of a stacked inline to a tabular inline. So let's go ahead and do that. And we can also customize the way the questions are displayed in a list. So by default, what it displays in the list is what's defined in our str function. We go back to our models. Right? Str is self question text, but we're not stuck displaying that. We can instead customize what's displayed in the list display. So let's go ahead and change that. and see how that works. And there you go. List of question text and date published. All right, the next step in the tutorial is they want to show us that we can put a method in. Now this method was defined in tutorial number 2, but we didn't do that, so let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so this was published recently method would go into our model. It's our question model. All right, was published recently. It uses time zone, so we'll have to import that. From Django utils, import time zone. And it also uses datetime. Datetime is not a Django class or function, it's Python. So we just use import. Whoops. There we go. And then go back to our admin, and we'll add that method here. Yep, and there it is. The next thing that the tutorial talks about is adding a filter. Maybe take a look at this line here, list filter equals pub date. Simply go back to our admin. And what that line does is it adds this filter here, by date published. Today, in the past 7 days, this month, all of our questions were published on the same day, but if we mixed it up, you could see how this would work. You could add more than one field, but in this case, our other fields are all character fields, and it doesn't do well with character fields. If we were to add question text to this, it would display all of the questions as an option. So instead of filtering by question text, instead we can add a search. Go back to Django, search fields. So get rid of this here. And that'll add a search field here. So let's say if. And now it's going to filter just those questions there. Now you could add other fields in your search fields, like in our case. And that will not add another search box. But now if I type if I had a topic name if, it would reveal those too. And I'll illustrate that in a moment, but before I do, I'll have to point out that I can't leave these blank because in order to do that back in my models, I would have to add blank equals true. Oops. Like that. Now without these, and I'll delete this from topic just to show you what happens. Without these, if I try to save this, it'll come up and say this field is required. So let me go ahead and fix that. All right. In this case, of course, I am going to fill in for something for topic. And I'm just going to call this topic if. I'm going to save it. Well, actually, hold on a second. My mistake. point I'm trying to show you is I'm going to add if to some question that doesn't show up in the search. Save that. All right, now if I type if here, you'll have if in the question text, but also this one here because if is in the topic. All right, this next section in the tutorial about customizing the admin look and feel, and under that section, customizing your project's templates. This is not specific to admin. This is information that you can apply throughout your project. Now it says create a templates directory in your project directory. I believe that's a mistake on their part. I think they mean the root directory. But who knows? Maybe it's me that's confused. They are referring to the outer directory, the one that contains manage.py in it. Alright, so they're going to have us create a templates directory in that directory. So let's go ahead and do that. So just to make sure I'm in the right place, I'm going to highlight manage.py, and then I'm going to click the new directory icon. I'm going to create the new directory for templates. Now, having made that directory, they're going to have us go into the settings.py file, and this here where it says appders, that's already there. It says appders equals true. You'll see that in a moment. But ders is right now an empty list. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, and here's our templates, and like I said, apps is true. Now, what this tells us, what this tells Django to do, is to look in the app directories in order to find templates. And that's what it does by default. But what we're going to do is, before looking in the apps directories, to go ahead and look in base directory. That refers to our root directory. And that should be in quotes. Now, before Django looks in our app directories for templates, it's going to look in base directory templates, which is the directory we just created. All right, going back to the tutorial, and we'll scroll down. And here they want us to create a subdirectory called admin inside of our templates directory. So let's go ahead and do that. And then they're going to have us find this admin basesite.html file that's in our Django files and copy that into our new admin directory. And now they discuss where to find your files depending on different installations, but we know where ours are. It's in the virtual environment that we created. I'm going to use my file system to copy this file. Alright, so it is wherever you created your virtual environment, and then in Windows, it's lib, site packages, Django, contrib, admin, templates, admin. And this is the file they want us to copy. So I'm going to copy this file, and I'm going to open up another file explorer, and into this new templates directory that we created in the admin, I'm going to paste the copy of that file. Now if we go back to the tutorial here, they want us to change this block. Or I'm sorry, what they want us to replace is this with something that looks like that. Alright, so let's go ahead and find that. Back to Studio Code. And this is the part they want us to replace right here. Alright, let's run this up and see how it looks. Alright, I have to say I cut out about 5 minutes of this video because this just didn't work at first. and I ended up restarting the server a couple of times, refreshed the screen, cleared the cache. I think the browser cache is the problem. Anyway, eventually I refreshed the screen, it came right up, but it took a couple of tries. That's something that could happen to you. You might make a change, and the change might not show up on your browser, and you could be scratching your head. And sometimes you just have to try clearing the cache and refreshing a couple times, and eventually it'll come up. But what they're trying to illustrate here, the admin app, like our polls app, will look for templates. And in this case, our template is, or our app, this is in our views file, and our app is going to look for a template named polls/detail.html. All right, so detail.html in the polls directory. Now, where exactly is this polls directory? We didn't specify the whole, the entire path of this polls directory, so Django is going to look in our apps for anything that matches this pattern, polls detail.html. It could find this, well, where we're hoping to find it, which is inside of our app, in the templates directory, polls detail.html. But now that we went to our settings file and we told it to look in this base directory first, if we created a subdirectory here and called it polls and put a detail.html in this directory, that's where Django will look first. And if it finds this, and if it finds detail.html in that polls directory, it would use that detail.html. And that's what we did to admin. Now, as they also say in the tutorial, they were just doing this to show you how to override templates. To do this particular task, another way to do it would be to subclass the admin site and then just change the site header attribute. Alright, this video is not going to be as long as the first video, but you've been listening to me for about 40 minutes or so. I do just want to add one more thing that they left out, or for whatever reason they didn't include in a discussion about the admin site. Alright. We created our first user using the command line, create super user. That's how you have to create your first user. You'll add other users through the admin panel. So we'll add a user right here. This part here, staff status, this will designate whether your users have access to the admin panel. So only your staff users will be able to log into the panel, but that's not all. They also have to be able to make changes to the models that you want to allow them to make changes to. So if you want someone in your staff to be able to make changes to questions, you have to give that person these permissions. If you want them to be able to make changes to choices, you have to give them those permissions. Now, one thing you could do is make this person a super user, and if you make this person a super user, none of this other stuff matters. Super users can do everything. But most of the time for managing your users, your staff will be this. You'll give them permissions specifically to what you want them to change. And anyone without staff can't even get back here. And that's it for today. See you at the next video.